Okay, so I guess we'll be joined in a moment by Daniel McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute. I'm sorry. Hi there, how are you?
Hi, Nat. How are you?
It's good to see you.
It's good to finally meet you.
Yeah, I've watched your show quite a bit, and remember you interviewing my father once or twice on the program. So,
Indeed. In fact, I'd corresponded with him over the years, over many years. He was always generous in letting us republish his work, always generous with his time, and still feel heartbroken that he's not with us any longer. I met him in person the first time last year at our RPI conference, and what a delight it was to speak with him in person.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And so maybe if you just would take a minute to introduce yourself and introduce us to the work of your organization.
Sure. Well, I'm the executive director of the Ron Paul Institute. The Ron Paul Institute is the extension of what Dr. Paul did in Congress for over the course of, I guess, 40 years. But we started it when he retired from Congress to really focus on the area of foreign policy and civil liberties. You know, the idea of the warfare state, the idea of the war on Americans at home, and to keep those aspects of especially those aspects of Ron Paul's public life alive. And that has been our focus. And so we put on an annual conference in Washington this past year. We had a huge turnout. And interestingly enough, the year before we had a live, it's becoming more poignant, I guess, as time passes, but we had a live call-in from Julian Assange to the conference last year when we did a panel on whistleblowers. So that was just incredibly important to us. But we publish thousands of articles. We do seminars and conferences across the country every year. And we do a daily show, the Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube, where we talk about these things every single day. In fact, we just did a show on Julian Assange on Thursday, the torture of Assange.
So what is his status? You said he was he video linked into your conference. Is that before he was shut off from this blackout in the embassy of his internet connection, or how did that work exactly?
Yeah, that was in September of last year. So he still was he was still freely operating. Okay. I think it was in March when they shut him down, when they shut him out. But no, at the time it was free and clear, and it really was an incredible moment. We had two massive TV screens up in the conference hall, and it was really an incredible moment when they both blasted up, and here's Julian sitting there with this interesting green screen background. So and he gave a really tremendous talk in fact, you remind me, I should put it online. It's not up yet, but it was really an incredible talk.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. So what are maybe you could just share some of your general feelings about the work of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. He's still arbitrarily detained. So when were you first introduced to WikiLeaks' work, and what do you remember?
Well, I started following it. I mean, I started when we were still in Congress. When we were some of the early leaks came out when we were in Congress, and we were so incredibly grateful because we knew a lot of the junk that was going on. We knew a lot about Iraq. We knew it was a disaster. We knew the neocons were lying. We knew they were full of crap. But when WikiLeaks started showing us the government's own documents, their own videos, the things that they were seeing internally, knowing that they were full of crap and lying to us, and we got a chance to see it ourselves, it was a glorious day. And we would sit in the office, my colleagues and me, and we would look at the WikiLeaks releases. We would discuss them. We'd go into Dr. Paul's office, discuss it with Dr. Paul, and it was really a tremendous thing. And it kind of vindicated all the work that we were trying to do from the inside to get the information out. So, you look back over it those several years ago, and you look at where we are now. It's kind of almost seemed like innocent times back then.
Yeah, that's what I recall too. I mean, as I was saying, I mean, it was for me this moment of real hope that things could change. That with all this information coming out, that there would be some accountability, that people would be, that the anti-war position would first of all be sort of vindicated, and and that things would change, or that people would have to stop, doing what they're doing. The government would know that their secrets are not exactly safe. so maybe that would sort of force them to, be better. And but instead it was just sort of this clampdown. But I guess I wonder, if you feel that WikiLeaks is, have these revelations really made a difference in terms of how the government operates, you think?
Well, first of all, we should understand that the war beast will fight back, and it did fight back. And there was nothing that irritated it more than seeing its truths, Washington seeing its truths laid bare out there, seeing the wanton disregard for human life, going into places like Iraq to liberate them and make them free, and in fact blowing them up. So you knew they were going to strike back, and then nothing made them madder than when the Vault 7 releases came and exposed the CIA as a corrupt, anti-American organization that it is. So it was already predestined that they would fight back and they would become vicious. But your question as to whether it made a difference, this is difficult, and not just with Assange, but with the Ed Snowden revelations. We knew what these guys were doing. We knew what they were up to. But when Snowden came out and showed it to us and put it in front of us, by the way, thanks a lot to WikiLeaks, which helped him get out of Hong Kong, as we know, and did an enormous amount to help Ed, but nobody cared about it. Thanks to these revelations, though, we knew from their own documents what they were doing. The question is, what good did it do? Sometimes in a fit of despondence, I'll ask myself that same question, because we had the Patriot Act, which is a nightmare. It's a totalitarian recipe for totalitarianism. And so when Snowden came out and said, look, you guys are not going to believe what's happening, of course, Congress immediately, oh my God, this is terrible. We've got to reform. That's it. Let's reform. And so the same guy, Sensenbrenner, who wrote the Patriot Act, said, I've got a good idea. Let's kind of do the same thing, make it worse, and call it the Freedom Act. And everyone in Washington said, all right, that's the kind of reform we like. So being somewhat cynical, but then thinking about the fact that we have a right to know, and we do know, and the world will never be the same for what WikiLeaks, what Julian Assange, what Ed Snowden have done. And what you choose to do with the truth is a decision that every American, every citizen, every person in the world has to decide for themselves. What are you going to do when you see the truth? You're going to close your eyes, you're going to open your eyes, wake up, and take action.
Yeah, that's very well put. I also think back on the Pentagon Papers. Very very similar. I actually just recently got around to watching the Post movie, with Tom Hanks, and it reminded me of that whole story. And it's very similar. The documents revealed the truth about what was going on in Vietnam. The government, of course, tried to shut it down, and it famously went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled, that rule 6-3 that the government cannot prevent these things from being published, and the public had a right to know. And of course, it didn't immediately stop the war. It didn't change everything at once, but we have the historical knowledge, and we're all better off by knowing the truth. And so I guess the WikiLeaks revelations can be seen in the same light, which one thing that always I find amusing is how mainstream journalists seem to try to distance themselves, or sort of consider, they call WikiLeaks something else other than journalism. To me, what they do is the function of journalism. The medium might be different. It might it's a modern it's the internet rather than the newspapers, but the function is the same. To reveal what it is that powerful people don't want to be revealed, and that's what good journalism should do. And so, how do you see that distinction? And do you think that when you hear someone sort of saying Assange is not a journalist, or WikiLeaks is something, or the government, of course, calls it a non-state intelligence service, whatever that means, hostile intelligence service. So how do you see that distinction?
Yeah, that's Pompeo. And, unfortunately, they do still have the microphone. It's slipping from their hands, and that's a very good thing. But, Dr. Paul said on the show that we did on Thursday about Assange's forced forced detention, if you want to call it that, something worse than that, really. But, you know, the news media, the mainstream media does feel, I think, somewhat ambivalent about this. They love to pile on. They love to ridicule WikiLeaks and Assange. But in the back of their mind, they are a little concerned, and they should be, because what Assange and WikiLeaks have done is exactly what they do on a daily basis. And as I said on the show on Thursday, you open up the Washington Post, you click on CNN, every single day you see insider sources have told us, sources inside the CIA suggest that ... So they're doing every day what WikiLeaks did. And if they get to Assange, if they put him in a cell for doing this, they better look out, because they're next. And I think they understand that. I think right now they feel immune from that, but who knows in this administration, in a future administration, how far the clampdown will go. And it's a pretty dangerous thing.
That actually reminds me of an article my dad published back in 2010, you know, when the clampdown on Assange really started. And the article was called, you know, all journalists are Julian Assange. And, you know, this, what he was pointing out, so one of the themes that the establishment or the government tries to, you know, portray about Assange is that what he's doing is different because he's actively soliciting classified information, which makes him a sort of co-conspirator in, you know, these crimes of, you know, leaking government secrets, and somehow that's different than, you know, what the Washington Post or New York Times has done or did with, like, the Pentagon Papers, for example. But I mean, the reality is that that's not true. I mean, journalists are constantly trying to get their sources to tell them to share information that maybe they shouldn't, that they're not authorized to share. I mean, that's what they do every day. You know, so I think you're right that, I mean, you know, any real journalist would know that you know, what's happening to Assange could happen to them, because it's the same concept. I mean, whether you're soliciting classified documents through a website with anonymous uploading, or whether you're speaking on the phone or whatever, you're still soliciting classified information. You know, so I mean, legally, I don't see how it's any different. So
absolutely, you know, when someone like Josh Rogan, the neocon at the Washington Post, when he calls up one of his CIA buddies and says, "Hey, give me a scoop, give me something on this, you know, give me something secret," I forget what it was. He had a big piece this last week that we talked about. But when he calls him up, he solicits the exact same way. "Hey, I'll keep you secret. I'll keep you private. You're my sources. Just give me something. Give me." And of course, the sources, they have an agenda too. They want to leak for certain, oftentimes for political gain. And of course, we don't know what's in the hearts and minds of those who have leaked to WikiLeaks. But I would like to think that they probably have a higher purpose, more of transparency than simply settling scores or making Trump look bad or making Obama look bad or what have you. So, of course, that's supposition on my part. But you're absolutely right. You know, this is exactly what Josh and all of the guys, all of the big writers in the mainstream, they do it every day. You know, it's nothing new.
Right. So. Yeah. I mean, it's also part of the fact that we, you know, the reality that we have so much classification. I mean, everything is classified. They classify everything. I mean, I remember another piece my dad wrote when Chelsea Manning was convicted. He wrote a good article, you know, about how necessary these kind of leaks are, because that week, I believe, when she was convicted, he happened to receive a response from.
There goes here comes the SWAT team.
Hold on one second.
The SWAT team's coming. Thought crime.
So, sorry about that. But that week he had received a response to a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, regarding some documents from the 80s, from the Reagan administration. You know, my dad was always very diligent about following
he was the
stories
best.
for, you know,
he was the best
year after year, decades. So at this point, this is historical information, but I forget the exact rationale they gave, but they gave a negative response, like, sorry, document is unavailable. And so, he wrote a piece about that, how, how even, 30 years later, you're still, everything is classified. There's no fear of anyone being exposed, any sources, coming under, any danger of being exposed or anything like that. It's just because they want to keep everything secret. Everything, they don't want anything to come out unless they put it out for their own agenda, as you say. So, so it seems to me that, these kind of leaks and, whistleblowing, is just essential. I mean, because you're not going to find out what's happening otherwise.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. The classification process has nothing to do with national security. It really is it's a weapon. It's a weapon in the hands of the government to keep us from knowing what the government's doing. And if you look at how it's been wielded, and even just a couple of cases, look at Peter Van Buren, how it was wielded against him. He went over to Iraq on a TDY from the State Department. All the stories coming back to us were how glowing things were. They were building factories and empowering women and building roads, and all these amazing things were happening. Well, Peter went over there and they saw that was just a load of crap. They were wasting billions of dollars. Contractors were getting rich. The Iraqis, their lives were getting worse. And so he tried to blow the whistle. Everything they claimed was classified information. It was used as a weapon. Look, at the same thing is true with John Kiriakou, who did his best to go through the proper channels. And when he got in their crosshairs, they used the classification process as a weapon to not only to try to destroy his life, but to put him in a cage for a few years for telling us the fact that our government was torturing people. It's sick, but it's a tool they use, and they've got the guns, so to speak. So, but our only weapon is openness and is dialogue, and is what we're doing, is blowing the whistle in our own way. So, there's no reason to be too despairing, I guess.
It kind of reminded me of also the case of Reality Winner. It's funny because I've been very skeptical of the Russiagate story, for the past couple of years, and but it wasn't really till her leaks came out where I thought, well, maybe there's something to it, because they don't want, they put her in prison for it. So now I think, well, maybe there is something there, but I think even with her leaks, it looks clear that it's still very speculative, what it is that these NSA documents that she leaked, no smoking gun there anyway, but then with that, I sort of thought, okay, maybe there is something to all this, the Russian meddling, because now they didn't want that to get out. So, maybe there is something there.
Yeah, that does make you wonder. And, the people like Reality Winner who are putting in these cages, this is not club fed. The places where Chelsea Manning was kept are horrific conditions that anywhere else in the first world would be considered torturous. The kind of solitary confinement, the psychological torture, the psychological manipulation that goes on with spending years by yourself in a cage. It's a horror for people that have done literally nothing wrong. So, but on the Russiagate, and we have to give your dad credit for, I think, being the absolute best. I mean, his pieces, when they came out, they were just, they were so concise. They were so perfect in debunking it. It was just, even now you should also put together a selection of his pieces on Russiagate and release them as a booklet or something, because they're really just tremendous the way he picked apart the story.
Yeah. It's actually been on my mind for a while to maybe pull together a kind of Robert Perry reader,
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Through, his early reporting. We have archives, as a student journalist, even from the late 60s and 70s when he was writing the Vietnam War. So, there's quite a lot of material there, we could pull together,
That's a great idea. And, with Amazon Publishing now, it's books on demand. It's no longer you have to go around begging to some big corporate, outlet to please publish this book. No, this guy's a dissident. No, or something. Right. So it's
there's a lot you can do yourself. That's true. Actually, also what you mentioned about the conditions that they, the Chelsea Manning found herself in prison solitary. And I think it's also important to remember, I mean, this is, the treatment that, Chelsea Manning received, and, also let's not forget about, Guantanamo Bay and all of these things. I mean, these are the reason that Ecuador gave Julian Assange asylum, because the U.S. has fallen so far from the rule of law, that they, that was the reason. I mean, they recognized that Julian Assange was being persecuted and that he probably couldn't get a fair trial, and that who knows what would happen to him if he is extradited to the U.S. I mean, whether he'd get a trial at all. I mean, because we don't have that system in place anymore of a rule of law based justice system. I mean, they assassinate people with drones. They throw them in Guantanamo without a trial, and so I think that's important to remember. I mean, and that's why Ecuador gave him the asylum, because of the problems that the U.S. has respecting the rule of law. So I think if the U.S. doesn't like not being able to get their hands on people like Assange, I mean, he might even be willing to come and face the music, as they like to say. Same with Snowden. If there was any hope for a fair trial, but as it stands, it doesn't look like that's really a possibility for them.
Well, I think he's also offered to come and give testimony to Congress in exchange for immunity. That seems like a perfect deal.
Mm-hmm.
You find out what's going on, you find out the origin, you find out the other side of Russiagate. In exchange, you don't throw the guy in the cage who's the messenger. I think that's a great deal, and that's probably why Washington doesn't want to take it. There probably are a few people on Capitol Hill on both parties who would go for that deal, but unfortunately, the atmosphere is so toxic there that, I mean, look, like someone like Senator Rand Paul, who went to Russia a couple of weeks ago to try to open up dialogue with his colleagues. What happened when he got back home? Both Republicans and Democrats screaming about how he's a traitor and how he's betrayed his country. It's just the hysteria in this country is like I have never seen before, and people of your father's generation, I'm sure, had never even seen it as bad before. When we could go and talk to the Soviet Union in the midst of a nearly hot war, no problem. Khrushchev and Kennedy, Nixon and Brezhnev, Gorbachev and Reagan, no big deal. Let's talk. And here you have a senator, whoever, a congressman who want to go over there and just open a dialogue, somehow talking to people that equals treason. It's a very sick state that we find ourselves in.
Yeah. I mean, diplomacy has become, criminalized. I mean, you can't. I mean, we saw that with the Helsinki summit. And I think Trump did a horrible job in the press conference, and I'm not really, there's a lot of things you could criticize there, but the fact that he talked with Putin, I mean, like that's normal. Like every president has done that, since Eisenhower. I mean, but now that's considered treason. I mean, that's the word that John Brennan used, which I think was part of the reason Trump might have decided to pull his security clearance. And but yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's become so toxic. I mean, actually, one of my colleagues is a Russian diplomat, and he used to work. He's an older guy. He worked in the UN in the 70s and 80s. With the Russian delegation, the Soviet delegation, and he says that he's never seen anything like what we see today. That even at the height of the Cold War, there was much more dialogue and respect, and sort of the dialogue has just gotten so toxic now that you can't even conduct diplomacy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, as you suggest, I mean, Trump sort of welcomes it, or sort of invites it with his style of monologue, with his approach to the presidency. There's no question about it. I mean, I'm not a New York person. I know I haven't been there, but my guess is this kind of loud, brash thing is sort of the stereotypical idea of what they're like. And in that respect, I sort of appreciated the press conference, because I thought it was refreshing, the fact that he was in your face to his detractors. I mean, the thing is, I've never been a fan of his, but the only thing that puts you closer to his camp is how horrible his detractors are, on the right and the left. I mean, you guys, don't you realize you're making us sympathetic to him? But more important than our reaction, and even the media's reaction, which was virtually 100% negative, and I'm sure you saw this, but right after the press conference, the Gallup did a poll, and they found that the vast majority of Americans, they thought it was a pretty good idea. And then they had a subsequent poll just a week or so ago that a big chunk of Americans said, yeah, the Russians probably meddled, but, let's move on. It didn't change anything. No big deal. So despite the media's relentless pounding, the Americans, thank God, are still have a little bit of their wits about them.
Yeah, that is surprising. I've followed these polls, and I find them very, interesting and refreshing. Like, okay, people aren't falling for this the way that, because you might get a different idea if you look on Twitter and you follow a lot of the comments there. You have so many of these Russia gators that are just really pushing this narrative. But when you get any sort of actual poll done, people say they want better relations. They want they're not. This is not their top issue. It looks like I'm getting a message here.
Uh-oh. Is it from the NSA?
Okay. So I guess Ray McGovern will be joining us in a moment.
Good.
So what are your feelings about Julian Assange's current situation, and what are your hopes going forward for resolving his situation?
Well, we closed our show out the other day with for what we can do, which is a passionate appeal to Americans. Contact your representative, contact your congressman, tell them to put pressure, contact the president, call the White House. The president was as a candidate, how many times they say, I love WikiLeaks? About 1,000. So, there's got to be a way to get through. There's got to be a way. We have to keep talking about it, doing what we're doing, and raising awareness of the situation. We just have to use whatever tools are at our disposal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think your point also about Julian's offer to come back and testify. This is what a lot of people have criticized him for not giving up this the source when it comes to the DNC and the Podesta emails. But he seems to be willing to talk about this, and so that seems like a pretty good idea. Let's. But yeah, maybe this is because they don't want to hear what he has to say. But
they can't handle the truth.
Yeah. I think Ray will be joining us in just a moment. Ray McGovern.
Okay.
So what else? What other projects do you have? Do you have a campaign for Julian Assange at the Ron Paul Institute?
We don't right now. We try to talk about him when we can, and we've talked to his people about a campaign to help them, and I hope we can ramp it up a bit in the future. We need a broad, beyond left-right coalition. We need to bring in conservatives, progressives, and everyone in between to understand what this is really about. This is not a partisan or sectarian issue.
Mm-hmm. I think that is one thing that I found interesting about Julian Assange's support base. Is that it really is trans ideology, transpartisan. I think a lot of the Trump supporters sort of came on board on his campaign after the election. But I think it's interesting to see how diverse his supporters are, and maybe there is a sort of opportunity there for building on that, and sort of finding common ground between left and right, and if those terms really mean anything anymore.
Let's hope so. Let's hope they stick around for more than just the hatred of Hillary.
That